So let me paint a picture of where I think we could go that would actually encompass some of the ideas and objectives that you've heard so far, both from Miriam and from what I think you will hear from Joe, from Sergio, from Mr. Delahunt, from Janice. We are at an opportunity, an incredibly important turning point right now in U.S.-Cuba policy. We're at a moment where we can take a look at the domestic politics of this issue that have driven our policy toward Cuba for so long, and take a look at the foreign policy dimensions of this issue, both bilaterally, within the hemisphere, and yes, even globally, and try to move toward a new era. I'm worried about incrementalism, and I'll just say this right off, not because I don't think Cuban Americans should be able to travel to Cuba. They should. All Americans should be able to travel to Cuba. My mother's here today, and we were driving down here, and I was telling her a little bit about this panel, and she said, but wait, isn't there something un-American about one ethnicity getting to do something that the rest of us can't do? And of course, that really is the nub of the issue when it comes to travel. And my concern, and then I'll go paint you the broader vision, is that if we get legislatively stuck only on the Cuban-American travel issue, are we taking the oxygen out of the room, sucking the wind out of the sails of the broader push in the Rangel-Flake bill, for example, to get rid of the travel ban entirely? It seems to me that we have an important window. We are not in a yes, the fundraising has started, and yes, the campaigns are organizing themselves, but this is only 2007. So can we, for just a second, put the 2008 presidential election on hold and try in this year, 2007, to get the ball rolling farther than just prioritizing Cuban-American travel? Because my concern is, Joe, that there's also an interest by some in the Cuban-American community that you work with closely, that this is really about, that putting Cuban-American only travel first is about preventing the policy train from leaving Washington and heading straight to Havana. And bypassing Miami is the biggest nightmare since Elian, that perhaps sort of the gringos would sort of look up and go, wait, we don't really need to have the tail wagging the dog endlessly. The policy is stupid. We need a broader foreign policy that reflects our national interest, and right now we don't have one. So I'm worried that there's sort of a sort of triangulation play going on here right now, and I think that the opportunity is bigger and shouldn't be missed. And what is that? Look, Miriam said it beautifully, others have too. The United States strengthens the hard line in Cuba by continually handing it a smorgasbord of fantastical, silly, and vengeance-driven policies that it can use domestically to shore up anti-Americanism, to harm the dissidents, to prevent debate internally about what kind of body politic, what kind of future, what kind of society Cuba wants to become. That's the role U.S. policy plays today. And were we to turn on a dime and say, look, we're going to get ourselves out of Cuba's domestic politics. We can't take Cuban Americans out of our domestic politics. Cuban Americans are Americans. I'm not saying that. But we can surely get ourselves a little bit more out of Cuba's. And by reshuffling the deck, Raul Castro and Carlos Laje and that cast of characters know exactly what to expect from the United States of America. They expect us to do itsy-bitsy incremental. They expect us to allow the tail to continue to wag the dog because they expect the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to continue to misread the dynamic on their island and to believe that you cannot get the White House if you don't have that 18% margin of Cuban Americans. Now, that's a debatable question. We'll hear about it. But they expect us to continue also to have much broader foreign policy concerns, which we do because this is a low-stakes issue. By comparison to Iraq, by comparison to the dramatic shifts in Latin America and the energy independence issues that we face, the immigration issues that we face, the global climate change issues that we face as a nation, this is no big deal issue. So the temptation will be to let it sit there and fester. But look at, I have 3 minutes. The better approach to take, in my view, is to say, let 1,000 flowers bloom legislatively in terms of travel, in terms of getting rid of the embargo, and start, as Janice suggested, in this bridges notion and unofficially, and then also officially, start figuring out who's on first, who's on second, who's on third in Havana. You know, most of us who do go to Cuba come back And the intelligence services in our country don't sit down and say, hey, fulanita, what did you learn? They're not asking the right questions about what makes that regime tick. But let's start doing it ourselves. Let's take Raul Castro's offer up and say, you want to have a wide-ranging discussion about, and negotiations with the United States? Let's do it. Let's have a blue skies bilateral dialogue. See what's on their mind. What do we have to lose? I don't think, look at, the Cuban American community may object to this because the argument will be that confers legitimacy upon that regime, and this Raul Castro regime is no more legitimate than the Fidel Castro regime. But the bottom line is that we learned what personalizing our policies does. This was all about Saddam, so we ruined a country to get rid of one guy, and now we have an entire regional mess on our hands. Let's look past the cast of characters that they're showing us and try to see who's in that second and third generation of individuals who are now running the place, because eventually we will get to see them as we started to in the late 1990s, and that will give us and send a signal to the regime and to the Cuban people that we have moved beyond this domestic politics-driven policy. And so with all due respect to this organization, which is all about domestic politics, and to Joe, who I think is doing a good job at bringing us all together, I think we have to have a much bigger vision, and the time is now to do that.
Thank you.